Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we come to the fourth psalm, and as we enter into this short psalm, we have a situation where David is described as the author of this particular psalm in the heading for the psalm, and he is going to talk about the calls to God, God's responses, and the safety that brings, the peace that brings along with it. And so let's take a look at the fourth psalm. Beginning in verse 1, we read, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long, O you sons of man, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed, and be still. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in my heart, more than in the season of their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." As you look at Psalm 4, you have this plea that goes out from David for God to hear him when he calls, to hear when he cries out to him in prayer. And certainly there is in the statements that follow the admission that God does hear. As a matter of fact, it's stated very clearly in verse number 3 that the God hears those who are godly, that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. In other words, the Lord specifically pays attention to and listens to the one who is godly. James would talk about in James chapter 5 the fact that the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much, and that's very much the same principle that is being developed here by David, and that is that God doesn't just listen to because he feels like he has to. He wants to listen to. He sets his heart toward the one who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. You know, many times there are people who are questioning whether or not God is listening, or question whether or not God is actually hearing what it is they have to say. And yet, when we are living our lives and when we are spending our lives seeking to serve Him, we don't have to worry about whether or not God is listening when we pray, when we cry out to Him in hardship and in pain and in struggle. And that's the setting in which a lot of these things are taking place. And so David says, God is one who hears when we come in distress, when we come in pain, when we come in agony. He talks about those who are causing the distress in verse 2, and those who love worthlessness and seek falsehood. Yet, in the midst of all of that, David has a place to turn. But I want you to notice something that is very important in the midst of all of this discussion, because we oftentimes view the next statement as something that we see in the New Testament, but we notice its origin, if you will, here. And that is the fact that David says in verse 4 that we are to be angry but not sin. You know, we live in a world right now that is very angry. And they're angry about all kinds of different things, and yet they are allowing that anger to flow out of them in ways that are unprofitable, in ways that are destructive, in ways that are going to destroy them if they continue down those roads. And yet in verse 4, David says, be angry, especially when you've been mistreated, especially when you've been harmed, or when you have been put into a place of distress. That anger is a common emotion. It is a natural emotion. It is a God-given emotion. But we cannot allow that anger to lead to sin. I want you to notice the second half of the statement of verse 4, because we often go to this idea of be angry and do not sin, but how? And the recipe for it is at the end of verse 4. He says, meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. In other words, think about it in private. Deal with it in private and be still. The word there for still is the idea of be silent. Don't say anything. One of the greatest problems that we have in our society today is this infatuation that we have with being heard on every minute detail of everything that comes along. That we have to speak all the time for everything. And yet David says we need to be those, especially when we are angry, who learn how to say nothing. Because anything we say, tinged with that anger, is going to make matters worse instead of better. And so you have the statement to be angry and not sin. But then at the end of the psalm, as you come down to the last couple of verses, he says in verse 7, you have put gladness in my heart more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. No matter what happens, no matter what is going on, the Lord provides and the Lord protects. And knowing the peace that God provides, we can dwell in safety. Even if the situation in our physical lives may be anything but safe, we know who we serve, and we know what awaits those who are righteous and those who are faithful. And so David says, I both lie down in peace and sleep. You know, when in the New Testament it talks about us having a peace that passes all understanding, when we put our cares on Him, when we are ones who devote ourselves to Him, and when we truly understand the promises of God, we can walk through the distresses and the troubles and the trials of this life and still have peace, and still go to sleep at night fully convinced that everything eternally will be all right. These are the lessons that I pull from Psalm 4. I hope they are things that are beneficial to you. I hope that they are things that help as we deal with times where, as we come through a pandemic in 2020 and uncertainty in 2021, there's a lot of distress, there's a lot of hardship, there's a lot of trouble. But there is a place to turn. There is one who longs to hear from those who are seeking to serve Him, and there is one who can bring peace to our lives, even if the world around us is falling apart. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at Psalm 5. I hope that you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.